Morning, everybody. Happy very wet Wednesday down here at least, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Good morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie. Got my mug too.
Where you are?
It's pouring down here in Lewisham. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank goodness it's just me. Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to fight the government for 70 years and see how far you get. So, what have we got for you this morning? Well, the Mirror has splashed on World Cup news. Is this news? That Qatar has banned symbols of peace and love from the tournament, because who needs that stuff? But more on that later. First, I want to take you to page 6, where there's my report. It's my show. I can do my stories of some really extraordinary scenes in Parliament yesterday when politicians from almost every party united to call for wider recognition and compensation for nuclear test veterans. It came a day after. The reason we didn't have a news agenda on Monday is because I was busy at an event where the Prime Minister's very welcome announcement was made that there would be a nuclear test medal following a 4-year campaign by the Mirror and 70 years of waiting by the veterans and their families. Yesterday, it was discussed in Parliament, and here's a flavour of the mood in the Commons. Roll VT, please.
Yesterday's announcement was a huge victory for our nuclear test veterans and their families. Finally, these veterans will now receive the long overdue medallic recognition that they so deeply deserve. When I've met nuclear test veterans and their family members in meetings and at rallies, I found their passion for justice truly inspiring. And I want to take this opportunity to specifically congratulate the tireless perseverance of nuclear test veterans campaigners that made today's announcement happen, including LABRATS, BNTVA, the Daily Mirror and their columnist, the relentless Susie Boniface. I was privileged enough to join them at the National Memorial Arboretum yesterday to witness the announcement and hear their moving testimonies. The outburst of applause was followed by deep sighs of simple relief that these medals have finally been agreed to, 70 years on from the first British test of a nuclear weapon.
Now, that was just a flavour. That was Rachel Hopkins, the Shadow Veterans Minister, responding to Johnny Mercer's announcement in the Commons about what was going to be done. Now, Jason, you've got the Tory Johnny Mercer there announcing that the medal was just the start of a recognition programme, whatever that means, and I'm sure we'll find out shortly, nodding along with his Labour opposite number, Rachel. We also saw ex-Plaid MPs, the DUP, the SNP, Tory grandees, backbenchers, all standing up and saying something needs to be done. So what more needs to be done, really, for these long-forgotten heroes? Now, can you remember, you were in Parliament a long time, can you remember a time in recent history, anyway, when they've been this united in one particular cause, or any point really in the Mirror's long campaign for this, that we've had that kind of response from the policymakers?
So first of all, Susie, you deserve lots of praise for this. And as they said in the Commons, the relentless Susie Boniface.
I'm having that added to my business cards.
I'll stand witness to that, because I know how hard you have worked behind the scenes at the Mirror to make sure this got the coverage it deserved.
Nagged, complained, thrown toys out of pram.
Cajoled,
what do you mean, page 24?
Yeah, unveiled yourself, berated, yeah, all of those words, harangued at times, yeah, but and also, as you said, this is not just a 4-year campaign for medals. This is isn't it the longest running Mirror campaign? I think we started this in the 1980s.
I think it's the longest running Fleet Street campaign, possibly the history of newspapers. Yeah, we started the early 1980s under Richard Stott. He was legendary editor. He's running the paper.
So first of all, kind of, to get this far after so many years of perseverance is very, very welcome. You know better than I do that we've kind of got so close previously promises from previous prime ministers who said, yes, we're going to do something about this, only to be kind of kicked out of office because of our own faults, has not helped the situation. But finally, on Monday, you got some of the way in the campaign. And yes, it is quite unprecedented to kind of see such cross-party support on this issue. And kind of, but it's taken a long time for people to actually realize the injustice which has happened here. But these people were serving their country, and they have suffered debilitating illnesses, and their children have suffered debilitating illnesses as a result because of the alleged exposure to radiation. So in answer to this very long answer to your question, and I hope you're going to answer it better than I can, but what does more need to be done? I mean, a medal is something, but it's not proper compensation, is it? And I think, if I'm correct, that other countries like Canada and Australia have given substantial compensation to their nuclear test veterans.
Yeah, and they're nuclear test veterans who are our nuclear tests. So in Australia, they've had a commemorative medallion for quite a long time. They also get priority medical care. In New Zealand, they get genetic counselling for their children, and they had a medal from the Queen in 2002. And we only missed getting one from our Queen by a few months, of course. And it was the year that she took the throne, first off in 1952, when the first test was held. So it would have been really appropriate if we could have got it from her. And I really don't think she would have objected at all. But it's got to be said as well that this is a huge amount of campaigning that's gone on for years by the British Nuclear Test Veterans Association. Less so recently, but they've campaigned for a very, very, very long time. It's an august organisation. LABRATS, which was founded fairly recently by sort of a splinter group, and the Mirror, and many, many people at the Mirror, not just me, the backbench, the subs, the editors, various editors that I've seen off over the years who I've complained at and said, why are you doing this more? So there's lots of people been involved in it. But I'd like to, if I can, just be self-indulgent, I'd like to praise every single veteran that I've spoken to over the years and who have never once said to me, I'm not telling you that. They've never said no. And they've never said that's personal. They've always opened up everything that they've got in order to try and get this done, which is sort of fairly unusual for any journalist to find. And that picture there is of Eric Barton from Worksop in Nottinghamshire. Now, he has campaigned with the BNTVA and as part of LABRATS for decades. He's a cancer survivor. His wife has had miscarriages. And this is just one guy out of 22,000 who was at the test. He was at a series of American tests that we sent our troops to on Christmas Island. And at the start of the year, these guys were told there is no point in you meeting a minister, even a junior minister. You're not going to meet anybody. You have no case to answer. And in the space of 11 months, finally, this picture shows that the state, someone in gold braid, has turned and is giving them a hug. And that is the thing that matters. That's why we campaigned for a medal. It's not compensation, Jason, you're right. It's not war pension reform. It's not what these people really need. But it's that recognition. It's that moment of acknowledgement. It's when the people in gold frogging give a hug to the people who really, really need it. And the relief that Rachel mentioned in that video was palpable in that room. It was really emotional moment. Now, Steve says he was there. He's one of the speakers. Monday was fantastic. It was so emotional. It was the start of getting veterans and descendants what they rightly deserve. For the state to finally say, we see you, was so important. When we met Andy Burnham a few months ago, or maybe a year ago now, with some of the veterans, he said, what you need is your Hillsborough moment. You need that moment when when everyone, the moral compass just corrects itself. And that's what happened. And that was what was so important. But out of that, to answer your question, Jason, out of the medal precipitates everything else that you do need. Because once they recognise there was a need for a medal, an important service, then they start looking again at war pensions. Then they start looking again at compensation and the fact that other countries compensate all their veterans. And some of the things that happened in Parliament yesterday, Johnny Mercer, who it's not his fault, but is very badly briefed, I think. Or no, incorrect. Very carefully briefed, but perhaps didn't quite see the holes in the briefing that he was given by civil servants to say that other countries do things differently and that the science isn't there to prove the case on compensation and stuff like this, and that war pensions are all available. War pensions are not given to nuclear veterans. They just don't win those cases. We had one guy at the event on Monday who had 3 hours being grilled while suffering debilitating illness on Zoom before he could get to the event. And they're put on trial for a war pension, and it's not acceptable. So there's much more needs to be done. And, there is science that proves some of this.
Well, isn't this the other issues, Susie? It was quite interesting you talking about how open and forthcoming the veterans and their families have been, and that contrasts with the stonewalling from the Ministry of Defence, which is, as I think you pointed out, in previous articles has refused to release information and medical records which could settle a lot of these issues once and for all.
Yeah, there's the issue about stolen blood, basically. So anyone who doesn't know, the veterans have reported to me for years they had blood and urine records taken at Christmas Island and at Maralinga and at nuclear tests. And when they've applied for their medical records, they're just not in there. And we managed to find a memo which detailed blood counts for one squadron leader. When his daughter applied to the RAF, she was told, "We do have this, you can't see it," which is potentially a criminal offence. She did manage to get a version of it from the Atomic Weapons Establishment in Harwell, and they confirmed they held a number of records for test veterans. So a number of test veterans now are just asking the AWE for any blood they've got. I suspect what happened and why Mercer has got the briefings he's got, which is to say that all medical records are available to the men. I suspect the blood counts were not categorised as medical records. They were categorised as part of the experiment, and so they were kept separate. So when you apply for your medical records, you get the fact that you fell over and cracked your head once on base. You don't get the fact that your urine or blood showed signs of radiobiological monitoring and problems there may be linked to fallout. So there is more work to be done there, and we certainly need to get into the government and start explaining the stuff that they're not having explained to them. And I don't think it's the officials conspiring against this. I think it's just an institutional inability to interrogate the facts. And they sit, to be fair, to some extent, they see it in the mirror and go, because they didn't read the mirror at their school. That's it pretty much. But what's really amazing in some of this stuff is that what Mercer has said is that the medal and recognition is going far wider. So, for example, he's mentioned Indigenous people in Australia and the South Pacific who were just as much victims of the UK's nuclear testing programme, where their lands were contaminated and the repeated cleanups of them didn't make an awful lot of difference, which is unsurprising when you consider that uranium-238 has got a half-life of 4.5 billion years. Of course, you can't clean that up. Now, Jason, would you expect if that kind of stuff is being talked about, there'd be maybe some geopolitical issues start kicking in here, foreign countries looking with interest at what Mercer's saying, maybe asking themselves what more than a medal their men can get, because this medal would go to Australia and New Zealand veterans of our test too. Perhaps some ambassadors are going to be instructed to hold a few meetings with the government. What do you reckon?
Well, this is a really thorny territory, unfortunately, Susie. I mean, anything, we saw this with COP27, anything which kind of refers to kind of Britain's colonial past. You get the kind of people becoming incredibly defensive and kind of unwilling to acknowledge, the legacy we left as a country. So yes, I can see it widening. I can see it becoming a diplomatic kind of question, but I can also see the political problems behind that.
Yeah, that's obviously why they refused and rejected a medal for so long and fought us on the simplest, easiest, cheapest thing. But because it was the simplest, easiest thing that they'd find hardest to deny is why we asked for it. It was not a campaign that was ill thought through, put it that way. But this is why they had that problem. And I don't know how they're going to address some of this stuff. They've got to really square a circle with some of that. And it's going to be really sticky, but not my problem. It's the problem with the brigadier in the basement, isn't it? So, he's going to have to just bite it, I'm afraid, and say, yes, terrible things happened and we need to make restitution properly. There are Aboriginal lands which are still contaminated with plutonium, found out in research, I think, earlier this year. So there is still a lot more to be done. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the nuclear test medal? Would you like more? Are you a nuclear veteran or descendant? what more would be necessary? As we've discussed there are war pensions that are being rejected and appealed, and veterans are being forced to go through incredible ordeals to try and get hold of a couple £100 a week. It's ridiculous. There is blood records that have gone missing and are being withheld, and that is still being denied and obfuscated by the Ministry of Defence, who are not addressing any of the detail in the Mirror's report. And in fact, the founder of the BNTVA, Ken McGinley, said that his records have been withheld from him for decades on the basis that revealing them to him would actually damage his mental health. I would argue they'd probably cure any stress or anxiety that Ken might have towards the end of his life if he knew actually what was going on. But still, we'll find out in the long term, won't we? Because it's not like the Mirror or I am going to give up. We're relentless. Now, on to some other stories. Some even more astonishing scenes, I suppose. Yesterday, the ex-Wales women's football team captain, Laura McAllister, was ordered to remove her hat before she entered the stadium in Qatar because it had a rainbow on it. You can just about see it in that little picture there on the right-hand side of the page. A Danish reporter had to remove his rainbow armband live on TV. And even the Belgium team was ordered to remove the word love from inside the collar of their away kit, where you'd think hardly anybody's going to flip and see it. But Jason, what right does Qatar have to set the rules for FIFA, which are the organisation that's issuing all these diktats?
Or maybe we look at it the other way around. What does FIFA think it's on, that it's done this dirty deal with a very regressive and repressive regime, and now is kind of trampling over and insulting people because they want to express their identity? And it comes back to this really nasty, could be a chance to break down barriers, work across nations, bring people together. And yet countries like Qatar, and before Qatar, Russia, which was the previous host of the World Cup, and before that you had China hosting the Olympics, are using sport as a kind of form of propaganda and as a form to kind of whitewash the reputation.
And it's worked so well, hasn't it?
And unfortunately, the sporting authorities, whether it's the Olympic authority, the IOC, or whether it's FIFA, collude in them because they get lots of money out of it. And I mean, it's a difficult one. I mean, you could argue that, Pakistan, for instance, has a pretty horrible human rights record, but we still play cricket against them. And you could say that, we can't, pick and choose which countries we play sport against in some instances, because otherwise we'd just be playing amongst a kind of very small group of slightly self-righteous nations. But on the other hand, the corruption involved and the unwillingness to stand up for basic human rights is deeply unsatisfactory.
Yeah, I'd quite like to see the self-righteous World Cup. Goodness knows who'd be playing it. Maybe we'd have a slight chance of actually winning it. That would be good, wouldn't it? I think Jason is frozen, so goodness knows if he can still hear me or not. I'll have to witter and see if we get him back and if the image is actually working. But get into the questions, ask us your comments. What do you think about how Qatar is handling? Is he back? What does he think about Qatar is handling the situation here? Now, the thing that bothers me, Jason, really is, what did Qatar expect when they invited the debauched, equality-obsessed West to come and play football? Did they really think we were all going to put on an abaya, forswear alcohol, and decide to be other than our hardware decrees?
I mean, it seems to have backfired on them quite badly, hasn't it? I mean, if they were using this for kind of propaganda purposes, I mean, all it's done is draw attention to the very bad human rights record, but I still think the blame primarily lies with FIFA. I mean, FIFA could make a stand on this. He could say, look, if you want the honor of hosting a major tournament, then you have to accept that nations and participants should be able to express themselves in the way they want to. And I mean, the only silver lining of this, as I was reading this morning, that the Welsh firm which is making these rainbow hats, the sales have gone through the roof.
Yeah,
and I have
exactly.
increased the mind.
Yeah, now Steve says, I think Steve's the only person watching today. Steve says, Qatar behaving this way is reinforcing just how intolerant and oppressive they are. And it is, you're right, Jason, it's such an own goal because, you know, basically what they're doing is telling the whole world not to go on holiday in Qatar unless you want to be victim of a crackdown of some sort, even when it comes to wearing of your hat or what's inside the collar of your shirt, which I'm sure is the opposite of the point that they were trying to make when they used FIFA at the height of one of the most corrupt scandals in sporting history to get the approval for the World Cup. And of course, that's something that Russia and China benefited from as well. FIFA's supposed to have been cleaned up since then. Maybe they need someone else to do the cleaning. We'll have to see, won't we? But, you know, well, how anyone's going to get through the next couple of weeks, we'll have to wait and see. But at least Peter Tatchell's being sensible and staying away. I wouldn't like to see such an absolute cultural institution as Peter being clapped in irons in a Qatar basement. So everyone who is there, well done for trying to wear your hats and armbands, but please look after yourselves. Now, keep asking your questions. If there's anybody other than Steve watching, what do you think about the nuclear test medal? What do you think about what the government should be doing to restore and make up for the events and the happenings of the past? Do we just say, oh, well, it happened and move on? Or do we have to do more about it? What do you think about Qatar hosting the World Cup? Is it going well for them? Or is it going quite badly, about as badly as it is for the Iranian team? Get into the comments and let us know. And we'll try to have a wrap at the end. But first off, there is some good news in the world, and we found it for you. Here it is. Now, after a year of bad parties being in the news, thanks to Pippa Crerar, formerly of this parish, it seems that the message has finally got through to politicians that the public take a rather dim view of taxpayer-funded shenanigans. Hooray! The body which decides MPs' pay and perks has issued guidance about how they're allowed to hold Christmas parties on expenses and not go too mad. And MPs of all parties are up in arms saying this is ridiculous, it's not happening. Why would we? Innocent Gov, innocent, definitely not me. Jason, is this proof, do you think, that after 13 years of scandal from the original MPs' expenses, backlash, that it will get through eventually even the tiniest brain on the most obscure backbenches? Or am I being optimistic and they haven't got it?
I think you're being actually unnecessarily cynical about this, Susie. The issue here is that MPs did not ask for this allowance. It was this was a decision made by IPSA, the independent watchdog on MPs' pay and expenses. Yeah, they are the ones who also raise MPs' pay independently of MPs. Yeah, and MPs get the backlash for this when actually it's not something you've asked for in the first place. You know, I have a lot of sympathy for MPs on this case, but most MPs I know on all parties are in it for the right reason. Most of them are not being, although there's a small minority in every party which is, and there are some which are kind of, you know, on the make and on the take, but they're a tiny minority. Most MPs I know work extremely hard. They make a lot of sacrifices to do their job, and they care a lot about their constituencies. Again, not all of them, but they have this incredibly bad reputation, and actions like this by IPSA do not help. And actually what it does is it drives people away from wanting to enter politics, which is not a good thing because we want to get people of best possible caliber. And it tars all MPs with the same brush. So the public go, oh, they're all the same. And that just actually kind of undermines faith in democracy. So it's a terrible decision by IPSA. And it's very unfair on the MPs.
Yeah, but we can have an argument about the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority some other time, perhaps. But I think what's interesting is that this guidance has been in place for some time. They've just clarified something. So actually, they have been allowed to have taxpayer-funded Christmas parties for their staff, it's got to be said, for some time, which I suspect now that historical Christmas parties are going to be something that maybe Pippa Crerar, maybe other journalists are going to be sniffing out, and it's not going to be.
There's a massive difference here between Boris Johnson who was breaking his own COVID rules and became the first Prime Minister in office to be issued a police fine. And MPs who employ a small number of people on actually not particularly good pay, having an allowance like any other employer in any other business, to actually give them, a thank you present once a year. But they're very, very different things.
Yeah, of course they are. And as Mike just points out there, this was guidance about office costs and how they operate, and that they can include a Christmas party if you really want to do that for your staff. But as we have said, it's not a great look. And the benefit is, I think that there's a lot of MPs who have realised it's not a great look and are prepared to say so. Although it's got to be said, there are, even when you turn around and say, well, we don't want to do this, it's a terrible idea, this still leaves the impression that, hang on, they're having Christmas parties. People only get half of it. And it still, doesn't look too good. Now, I think we've got one more comment. Derek says, the MP's gravy train should be stopped. I've never seen any gravy in the House of Commons, Derek. I mean, I'm sure there is some, and it's probably subsidised, but I've never seen a gravy train. I have, as Jason has, seen lots of people work very hard. If you imagine, it's not like a group of mates who are all sort of chowing down at the same trough. It's like an office building, and there's loads of people in there who don't know anyone else, and they just go to one room in that office and they talk to the 4 people they know every day, and there's one MP who's their line manager in charge of it, and that's kind of it. And occasionally they get a phone call from the leader of the party and told to do this, that, and the other. But all those MPs aren't all like in a conspiracy, because half of them don't know anybody else who's there, or they hate them, or think, oh, they're awful, why would I speak to that person? So it's not quite as it appears sometimes. Jason is right. But this look of the gravy train, Jason, isn't it? That perhaps they realise the PR, they need a better press, is what they need. Public relations would probably help. Don't leave it up to the MPs, because some of them are very strange. Now, thank you very much, Jason, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Prime Minister's questions will be carried on these channels later on, so come back and have a look at those. And we'll have to see what happens. I'm going to be nice about Rishi Sunak for 1 week, because he gave me my medal. And next week is business as usual. But until then, we'll see you again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Tatty bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Susie.